Hey all, I'm Kamen. Welcome to Breaking on the Daily. Welcome back from our 2-day break over that Thanksgiving sort of scenario. Today, we begin with a few updates on the election, actually. It's been a bit since I've actually talked about this. Pennsylvania, just on, I think it was Wednesday, had a public election hearing in which Giuliani laid out the case in Pennsylvania with regard to all of the sort of fraud and irregularities and the things that you're seeing in Pennsylvania. One of the most poignant of which being the fact that over the course of 600,000 vote spikes, essentially what got the frauds to come in thing, is 600,000 votes for Joe Biden were in those spikes total. I think it was all of the spikes. Though I think the biggest one was around 300,000. And during that same time, Trump got 3,200. Which is a ridiculous number. Completely ridiculous. It's outside the realm of possibility under any sort of any aspect. You go to literally any demographic in the country. You go to literally any place in the country, including deep blue, complete trash towns like San Francisco or Seattle or something. You're going to find more than I think of that as probably 96, 97% Biden and like 3% Trump. You're going to find more people voting for Trump in literally any other place in the country among any demographic in the country. You could find the most ridiculous woke progressive stack dominant person in the country, demographic in the country, and you'd find a higher percentage voting for Trump. It is statistically almost impossible, and you don't see that sort of, and you'll see a lot of denialists with regard to the sort of fraud and irregularity say, well, he disincentivized mail-in voting. But here's the thing. Most of the rest of the country had Trump at a 2-to-1 disadvantage in mail-in voting, with Biden generally getting twice the votes in mail-ins that Trump did. This isn't 2-to-1. It isn't even close. All right, this is completely ridiculous. It's not. These are many orders of magnitude less than 2-to-1. It is a complete farce. The idea that this is somehow legitimate in any way, and it was so ridiculous that to the point where everyone, when they heard this, laughed because it's just that stupid. It's just that obvious that it's ridiculous. And by the way, that's the whole. If you corrected that, or if you took out all those ballots, which is probably what would be necessary to do, because you have no way of actually verifying these ballots in any way, it would completely decimate Biden's lead. It would make Trump ahead by a few 100,000 votes. This is all the stuff that you see. It's why you see on election night, everyone was like, Trump's winning, and Trump's gonna win. Like, everyone was saying that on election night. But then the next day, Biden's won, essentially. I mean, he's taken the lead in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, and all these sorts of states, all these states that are currently in flux and in legal challenges currently. All that happened overnight because the night beforehand, he was up by a few 100,000 votes in Pennsylvania and in Wisconsin. He was up by a good amount in Georgia. Arizona he wasn't up in, but there's still quite a few ballots to actually count still. Before they all stopped counting, and then at around 4 in the morning, they started counting again, and suddenly there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Biden ballots being put in. That's what happened. I mean, the idea that there's nothing to even investigate there is utterly ridiculous. There's obviously something to investigate there, because that's a weird coincidence regardless. Not that I even think it's a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence. But even if it was a coincidence, that's something to investigate, because people are going to look at that and reasonably assert that's weird. Because it is. It's not what you expect out of a natural, normal election. You do have more stuff coming in, though. Michigan Senate Committee is now to hold a hearing to probe vote counting issues in Detroit. And for those who don't know, there have been quite a few allegations with regard to the Michigan, and particularly Wayne County, vote totals. Because what you see is that their voter registration data is really, really wonky in the sense that there is none. Look at Steven Crowder's videos on Michigan, for example. There are 0 registered registered voters, as opposed to 70,000 or so votes cast. And you also have examples similar to other places where there's just weird stuff going on with the mail-in ballots. Once again, in the Pennsylvania hearing, Giuliani mentioned ballots being returned on the day of them being sent out, or even beforehand. And you have similar things going on in Michigan. And by the way, sorry for the audio. I still have family over from Thanksgiving, so you know that's still how that's going to work for a bit. But that's about it for our election news. We still have more stuff going on. As I've been saying for weeks, this is going to go for a Supreme Court hearing. Everything else that happens beforehand is just set up. It's all just set up. We're just waiting on a Supreme Court hearing. And, you know, frankly, after just yesterday, I became much more confident in the ability for that to actually happen. Because the Supreme Court, for those who didn't hear about it, just a little bit over 24 hours ago, ruled against Cuomo's coronavirus limits on religious gatherings, which is a really, really good sign. Now, you can see in this article that it says Barrett playing a key role, and yeah, she did. She's the new person on the court, the new Supreme Court justice, and so obviously she's going to shift the court. But what's worth it to mention, what a lot of people are missing, is that now Kavanaugh's the swing vote, because he's the one who's going to be waffling the most often, and Roberts is essentially a liberal at this point. I mean, you can say, oh no, he was appointed by Bush, but tell me when in the last, 5-6 years, where he's actually sided with the conservatives on anything that wasn't eminently obvious. I mean, and I would say even this is an eminently obvious decision. Obviously, the Supreme Court, not the Supreme Court, the First Amendment supports people's rights to worship. That's obvious. It is explicit in the First Amendment, and that doesn't go away just because a pandemic's happening, obviously. But regardless, the governors have been ignoring this, and you know, this leads on from what I've been saying over the past few days, and I think over the past week, the earliest I've been mentioning this, is that all of these pandemic measures, all of these unconstitutional doctrines and nonsense, is going to be worked out, and that's why we're lucky. I mean, this is just more evidence to that point. And we are simply lucky to live in the American system as we do. Because we, unlike a lot of other countries, UK, France, many European countries, our system is fundamentally designed to weed out these sort of government overreaches, and is designed to prevent them in large respect. So and we're lucky to have these sorts of written constitutions which prevent the government from overstepping its bounds. Compare that to something like the UK, where they have speech codes and all that sort of thing. They can very easily limit worship or any sort of thing they want without any repercussion or any sort of response from the citizenry being able to be affected. The citizenry isn't going to be effectively be able to respond without changing the law again. Whereas in America, there are systems designed to prevent that sort of thing. And that's a good thing. It is something to be thankful for. And you should, of course, keep in mind, even after Thanksgiving, that you should be thankful for many things in the world as it stands, in your own life. And we continue with something I'm personally thankful for, is that hundreds of anti-lockdown protesters gathered for Thanksgiving meal at Oregon State Capitol. It's a good thing. I mean, protests are helpful, especially when they're protesting in favor of freedom, and they're protesting against tyranny and authoritarianism, which is what they're doing in this case. You'll see a lot of people going around saying, oh, well, all of these sorts of people are just killing grandma and all of these sorts of things. And you see this all over the place in many media outlets, but I would suggest you look other places to see their consistency. Because compare that to Black Friday, something which is still happening, and many in-store places are still happening, because all the big box stores have been open with no restrictions throughout this entire process. Which, by the way, has been one of my biggest criticisms of the whole lockdown rigmarole. Because, as I have stated in prior videos, it doesn't make sense to close down the specialty store in favor of the big box store, because all you're doing in that case is preventing any sort of social distancing from happening, because everyone who would normally go to the specialty store to get whatever particular thing they wanted to get, or, you know, whatever it might be, instead they're going to the big box store, like everyone else who is unable to go to a specialty store to get what they want. So it ends up being that you end up putting a lot more people in the big box stores, and you don't actually prevent anyone from going out. The same amount of people are still going out to get whatever they're going to get. I mean, I haven't been going to the store less during the pandemic. It's been pretty much stable for me, except for the time where I was actually out of work for the short period of time in which that was the case. During the time, you know, I was normally working, I still went to the store around the same amount of times that I would normally go to the store. If anything, I'd go more because I've gotten turned on to physical media much more often nowadays than I used to. And, you know, buying things physically and that sort of thing. So this sort of restriction doesn't actually help in terms of preventing spread through social distancing, because it doesn't promote it. That's always been my argument against these sort of lockdown measures. And by the way, that's my argument against all the national food chains from being closed currently. Because even in places in which restaurants are open pretty much unfettered, the national chains are still closed for indoor dining. And what that leads to is it leads to all of the local chains being swamped with customers 24/7, pretty much no matter what day it is. This has been a common aspect of restaurant work, and I'm sure anyone who's working in the restaurant industry currently would agree to this, and has seen this sort of increase in business over the past few months. I've certainly seen it, and I work in the restaurant industry currently. It's just fairly obvious. But of course, we do have more stories. This one about the WHO. The WHO is telling doctors not to prescribe the only COVID-19 treatment approved by the FDA, because really, we couldn't be convinced anymore that the WHO is absolutely just a Chinese asset and isn't particularly interested in actually performing its supposed duties. And people might say, well, maybe the FDA did it wrong. Here's the thing. The study on which the FDA based its decision is more comprehensive and better done than the WHO's one, explicitly. I mean, it's pointed out in this very article. That, quote, that study, still incomplete, used methods inferior to the National Institute of Health, which is what the FDA used, trial, that confirm the efficacy and safety of the COVID drug, now in many countries by the brand name Valkyrie. Oh, jeez. I mean, and that's not all for the WHO stories, of which the WHO is simply ineffective. Another team of WHO scientists is going to investigate the origins of the coronavirus in Wuhan. And for those who don't remember, back just a couple weeks ago, I was talking about how the first round of studies on this front were completely ineffective because essentially the WHO was kowtowing to China the whole time through. And I failed to see in this instance, in this case in which we're seeing them do it again, in which they're actually changing anything. I mean, it's like the Georgia recount, which wasn't actually an audit. You're seeing them lay the groundwork for going back in, but they don't actually have any new measures that I can see. So far as I know, there isn't any new, particularly new and particularly effective measures for actually making this more transparent than the last one. So we're essentially going to get the exact same thing that we did last time. Because let's be honest, China's not going to let people just go around and see their malfeasance on this pandemic, because I'm sure there is many, many more things there to uncover, because otherwise they wouldn't really be all that worried about having a transparent investigation even the first time. I mean, it's obvious that China has been lying the whole way through on this pandemic. And we're not going to solve anything by trying to kowtow to them. I mean, it would be more effective if the U.S. just invaded China to try and get answers. Legitimately. It would be more effective, and it would cause less problems. Like, geez. Honestly. You're not going to get anything out of this. Nothing's going to come of this, obviously. To anyone who understands how China has been handling this entire thing, and understands that they have something to hide, because otherwise they wouldn't be this adamant about being this opaque about both their numbers and on the actual pandemic itself and the origins of the virus. They obviously have more to hide. I mean, I do hope we eventually find this out, but I don't think it will happen while the Chinese are still under the boot of the Chinese Communist Party. It's just not going to happen. But yeah, that's all for our stories today. I'm going to leave you here. I'm Cal Kidman. This has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.